welcome to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the people that count in the history of mathematics. I'm your host, Benjamin Cornish, and today we are dropping into the life and work of one of the most fascinating figures of ancient Greek mathematics and philosophy, Archytas of Tarentum. Now, when I'm not in my classroom, behind the counter of an ice cream van, recording high-quality podcasts, or looking after my daughter, I take great delight in the parochial pursuits of my sleepy English village. Not wanting to intimidate you with my status, but I currently sit as temporary chairman of the subcommittee in charge of the village fete. It's a demanding post, one fraught with intricate negotiations over bunting placement and thorny debates about the order of events, but it is also a stage upon which rivalries play out, none more fierce than my long-standing grudge with Rupert, the perennial victor in every guessing competition the fate has to offer. Whether it's estimating the number of marbles in a jar or guessing the weight of a cake, Rupert's uncanny knack for accuracy is both impressive and insufferable. One year, in a fit of competitive zeal, I studied historical data on jar sizes and marble densities to improve my chances. And yet, despite my efforts, Rupert triumphed once more, grinning smugly as he claimed his prize, a box of assorted toffees. But this year, I was determined to change the game, literally. I devised a new stall, one so ingenious it would level the playing field, and, just maybe, give me the upper hand. Here's how it works. A beanbag, shaped like a rat, complete with tail, is dropped through a near-vertical tube. At the other end, the contestant wields a stick, poised to strike the rat as it emerges. It sounds simple enough, but the game requires an almost preternatural ability to predict the trajectory and timing of the rat's descent. I call it Splat the Mouse. I had thought of everything, the weight of the rat, the diameter of the tube, the friction coefficients. I tested it rigorously, fine-tuning the balance to ensure it was challenging but fair. And as the chairman, I had the pleasure of introducing it to the fete with much fanfare. Rupert, of course, couldn't resist the lure of a new competition. He sauntered over, confident as ever, ready to add another victory to his collection. But this wasn't a jar of marbles or a static cake. This was motion, dynamic, unpredictable, and as it turned out, Rupert's Achilles' heel. Time after time he missed the rat, his stick swiping at empty air. The crowd cheered, the rat flew, and I stood by, barely concealing my glee. His face turned the scarlet colour of a Pims-fueled rage. By the end of the day, the police had a difficult job of removing him from the bouncy castle. Ragged cloth in his teeth, dried lentils littered the lawn. This petty rivalry, amusing as it is, serves to remind me of the nature of human ambition and the ceaseless drive to measure, predict, and understand the world around us. Whether we're solving ancient mathematical problems or trying to outwit a local adversary, we are compelled by the same impulse, to bring order to chaos, to discern patterns in the seemingly random. And this brings me to Archytas of Tarentum, the subject of today's episode. Archytas was a man who sought not just to understand the world, but to harmonize it. A mathematician, philosopher, statesman, and inventor, he exemplified the idea that knowledge is not a static possession, but a dynamic process, a kind of motion, if you will. It's this motion, both literal and metaphorical, that we will explore today. From his work in geometry and mechanics to his philosophical musings on unity and opposition, Archytas offers a vision of the world that is as relevant now as it was over 2 millennia ago. So, let's set aside our rivalries and petty concerns, at least for the next 20 minutes, and dig into the life and ideas of this remarkable figure. Archytas is yet another mathematician who is not a household name, but his contributions gave the initial push for both mathematics and mechanics. He was an extraordinary blend of disciplines, a true Renaissance man, centuries before the Renaissance itself. if that is even possible. Perhaps it would be better for me to say the kind of man that the Renaissance men were trying to renaissance. Archytas lived in the 4th century BCE in the city-state of Tarentum, in what is now southern Italy. He is perhaps best remembered for his work in geometry, and for being a pioneer in the study of motion and mechanics, and yes, we'll get to the part about the flying machine. But first, let's set the scene. What kind of world did Archytas live in, and what ideas did he inherit from his predecessors? In Archytas' time, Tarentum was a thriving Greek colony in Magna Graecia, in the southern part of the Italian peninsula. It was a hub of commerce and culture, heavily influenced by the philosophical traditions of the Pythagoreans. The Pythagorean school, founded by Pythagoras around 6th century BCE, emphasized the idea that the universe is fundamentally mathematical. Numbers, ratios, and geometrical relationships were seen as the keys to understanding reality. Archytas, born about 428 BCE, became a prominent leader of this intellectual tradition. He was a follower of Pythagoreanism, but he was not content to merely preserve the teachings of his predecessors. Instead, he expanded on them in new and creative ways. This ability to innovate within a tradition is one of the hallmarks of Archytas' genius. One of the most intriguing aspects of Archytas' life is his dual role as a mathematician and statesman. He served as the general of Tarentum's army, and was reportedly never defeated in battle. Modern commentators call him the numerator, as he always came out on top. His leadership was grounded in a belief that mathematics and philosophy could guide ethical and effective governance. To Archytas, the logical clarity of mathematics was not just a tool for solving abstract problems, it was a model for how to live and lead. Modern tacticians will tell you that it is not soldiers and guns that win a war, it's logistics. Personally, I would rather go to battle following a mathematician than a thug. Now, let's get into the mathematics. Archytas' most celebrated contribution is his work on the duplication of the cube, one of the 3 famous problems of ancient Greek geometry. You've probably never heard of this problem under its other name, the Delian problem, but let's be real, it's a much better name. The challenge was to construct, using only a compass and straightedge, a cube with exactly twice the volume of a given cube. According to legend, the problem originated when the people of Delos sought to appease the gods during a plague. The oracle of Apollo told them to double the size of an altar in the shape of a cube, but it quickly became clear that this was no simple task. The problem resisted solution for centuries, and in fact, it was eventually proven to be impossible with the tools prescribed by Greek geometry. Archytas, however, approached the problem in a way that was both ingenious and transformational. He used 3-dimensional geometry to solve it, arguably one of the earliest applications of solid geometry. His method involved the intersection of 3 surfaces, a cone, a cylinder, and a torus. By finding the intersection point, Archytas effectively constructed the side length of a doubled cube. We should note, however, that his solution was likely a result of mechanical means, perhaps using a moving geometric construction, similar to Hippias's quadratrix. As such, some commentators, like Plato, regarded the problem as still unsolved. For me, I highly value a brilliant method over a correct answer, but that's just the teacher in me. I would mark Archytas as correct. This solution was remarkable, not only for its ingenuity, but also for its implication. It showed that geometry was not limited to flat, 2-dimensional surfaces. Archytas was among the first to recognise the potential of 3-dimensional reasoning, paving the way for later developments in spatial geometry. This is no abstract method either. Consider that today we still use relatively fundamental tools to construct 3D objects on graphical software, CAD/CAM machines, video games, etc. These tools being the distance between 2 points and the plane intersecting 3 points. While Archytas' work in geometry is impressive, his contributions to mechanics are equally fascinating. In fact, Archytas is often called the founder of mathematical mechanics. On a quick side note, it's going to take a fair while before I stop telling you that so-and-so is the father of such and such, but at least I don't need to use the word beget. Mathematicians don't traditionally get up to much begetting. He believed that motion could be studied mathematically, and he applied geometric principles to understand mechanical phenomena. Archytas' most famous invention is his so-called flying machine, a wooden pigeon that was supposedly powered by compressed air or steam. Now, we should be curious about taking this at face value. Ancient sources are often prone to exaggeration, and we don't have any surviving diagrams or detailed descriptions of the device, but even if the pigeon was more of a mechanical curiosity than a functioning prototype, it reflects Archytas' interest in applying mathematical principles to physical systems. This idea of a flying machine is one that fascinated ancients, worming its way through Ovid's Icarus and even to Da Vinci. But who first caught this worm? Why, Archytas' early bird, of course. In his philosophical writings, Archytas also explored the concept of motion more broadly. He posed questions about what it means for something to move, and how can motion be measured and described. These questions were deeply influential for later thinkers, including Aristotle, who grappled with similar issues in his Physics. Archytas' ideas can be seen as an early attempt to bridge the gap between abstract mathematicians and the physical sciences. Archytas' exploration of motion wasn't just a curiosity. It set the stage for a mathematical approach to dynamics that would resonate through history. He investigated the relationship between time, distance, and velocity, trying to describe motion in quantitative terms. While Archytas' work remains largely qualitative and geometric, his ideas planted the seeds for a more systematic analysis of motion. To answer this call, we have to fast forward nearly 1800 years to medieval England, where we find the Oxford calculators, a group of scholars at Merton College, Oxford, in the 14th century. The Oxford calculators, including Thomas Bradwardine and William Heytesbury, took up the challenge of describing motion mathematically. They developed the mean speed theorem, which states that a uniform accelerating body travels the same distance as if it were moving at its average speed over the same time interval. This theorem, and the systematic approach of the Oxford calculators, shows a direct intellectual lineage to the kinds of questions that Archytas raised. Though separated by centuries, Archytas' work on motion and the Oxford calculators' mathematical descriptions highlight the enduring nature of these questions about how the world works. Both Archytas and the Oxford calculators viewed mathematics as a way to understand not just abstract concepts, but also the physical universe. This linkage underscores how foundational ideas in one era can inspire revolutions in another. But we may need to wait several more episodes to really get into the work of the Oxford calculators. Another area where Archytas made significant contributions was music theory. As a good Pythagorean, Archytas was deeply interested in the mathematical basis of musical harmony. He studied the relationship between the lengths of strings and the frequencies of the sound they produced, developing a mathematical framework for understanding musical intervals. Archytas introduced a classification of the musical scales that included arithmetic, geometric, and harmonic means. These concepts were more than just theoretical curiosities. They set a tone for a way to connect the abstract world of numbers with the sensory experience of sound. For Archytas, music was a demonstration of the Pythagorean belief that mathematics underlies the structure of reality itself. Beyond his technical achievements, Archytas was also a philosopher in the truest sense of the word. He wrote about ethics, politics, and the nature of knowledge, often blending these topics with his mathematical insights. Archytas believed that mathematics was not just a tool for solving practical problems, but also a means of cultivating the mind and achieving a harmonious life. One of Archytas' key philosophical ideas is the unity of opposites. He argued that many apparent contradictions, such as rest and motion, or unity and multiplicity, could be understood as complementary aspects of a larger whole. This perspective reflects the influence of a Pythagorean and pre-Socratic thought, but it also anticipates later developments in dialectical reasoning. Archytas' ethical philosophy was deeply connected to his political career. As a leader of Tarentum, he emphasized the importance of justice and moderation. He believed that a well-ordered society, like a well-constructed mathematical proof, required balance and proportionality. This idea resonates with the Pythagorean view that harmony, whether in music, mathematics, or indeed politics, is the ultimate goal. This concept of unity links with the dialectical framework of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, later formalized by Hegel. Like Hegel's process, where contradictions are resolved into a higher unity, Archytas sought to reconcile oppositions in his work. For example, in his study of motion, he attempted to understand rest and movement as interdependent phenomena. While Archytas didn't articulate this in the formalized dialectical structure of Hegel, the philosophical spirit of harmonizing opposites is clear in his writing. So, why does Archytas matter today? One reason is that he represents a new movement in the history of mathematics, when abstract reasoning began to be applied to the physical world. His work on the duplication of the cube and the study of motion foreshadows later developments of analytic geometry and physics, and Archytas' influence can also be seen in his impact on other thinkers. He was a close friend of Plato, and some scholars believe that his ideas helped shape Plato's philosophy, particularly his interest in mathematics and its role in understanding reality. Archytas' blend of mathematical rigour and his philosophical insight also inspired later figures like Euclid and Archimedes. Finally, Archytas' life serves as a reminder of the interconnectedness of knowledge. He didn't see mathematics, philosophy, politics, and mechanics as separate domains, but as parts of a unified whole. For Archytas, the pursuit of knowledge was ultimately a way to understand and improve the world, an ideal that remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. He's also a role model for us all, that maybe if you too study your trigonometry, you might be able to be an undefeated general in battle. And that's all for today's episode of the Mathematicians Podcast. We've explored the life and legacy of Archytas of Tarentum, a mathematician, philosopher, and inventor who truly embodied the Pythagorean vision of a mathematically ordered universe. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to be in harmony with the universe and leave a review and subscribe. You can also follow the pod on Instagram at mathematicians.pod for slightly less serious content. And next time, we're going to be taking a break from the usual format of a scripted episode and inject an interview with an expert in a new sub-series called The Injectives, where I will be talking one-to-one with a philosopher, professor, and podcaster, Dr. Peter Adamson from The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. So make sure you don't have any gaps in your podcast schedule next week on the Mathematicians Podcast. Until then, goodbye. The music today is Danse Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.